Well, good morning, White Flag. How's everybody doing this morning? Good. Well, I'm glad you guys are here joining us. If you're watching us online this morning, thank you so much for taking time out to join us for service today. If I haven't had a chance to meet you yet, my name is Jason. I'm one of the pastors here. And we've been in this series called Deceived. This is actually week 3 of our series now. This week, before I get into the story, I kind of want to just take a moment and tell you something that happened to me a long time ago now, right? Back in the late 80s, when I was a middle schooler, and again, like I said, it was a long time ago, I was a basketball player, and quite honestly, I was a terrible basketball player. Because even in 8th grade, I was already 6'4", so I was already this height in 8th grade, but I had grown 14 inches in a year and a half. So I pretty much was tripping over my own feet. I couldn't hit the broadside of a barn, much less a basket, from more than like 2 feet away. It was just terrible, and it was embarrassing to be 6'4" and be so bad at playing basketball. But then something happened, something I knew was going to change how good of a basketball player I was. At least that's what the commercial promised, right? There was this shoe that came out, and they promised that if you got this shoe, you'd be the best basketball player you can be. The only problem is when you're not a good basketball player anyways, that doesn't change much. But they promised that that would make you a great basketball player. And so I thought, if I can get this shoe, then all of my teammates will be envious. And they'll all kind of look up to me. And if I'm a better basketball player, then I'll fit in, I'll feel better about myself, I'll have more self-esteem. And not only will my teammates notice, well, I was a middle schooler, so of course, as a middle school boy, what do you want more than anything? Middle school girls to notice you, right? And so I swore that if I could get this shoe, somehow everything would be better. And this shoe was called the Reebok Pump. If you guys, I think we have a picture of it that we're going to put up there, hopefully, or not. Anyways, the Reebok Pump was this amazing shoe, and it was in the tongue of the shoe, there was a little basketball. And if you squeeze this little basketball, what happened was it filled air chambers up all around your feet. And it made this custom fit type shoe. And what was really cool about that is, like I said, then you're not tripping over your feet, the shoes aren't sloppy. And this was the pinnacle of basketball shoe. This was like the shoe everybody wanted to have. But it was also the pinnacle of 80s fashion, which quite honestly was terrible. So these shoes were really kind of ugly. But the only problem was I knew I was never going to get the Reebok Pump. Because even back in the late 80s, the Reebok Pump was well over $100. Which equivalent to today, you might as well say the shoe was like almost $200 for this shoe. And I have a younger brother and I have a younger sister, and for whatever reason, my parents thought it was necessary to get them new shoes as well. I'd have been fine if they'd just bought me shoes and let them go without, but my parents thought, no, they have to have shoes. So I knew I was never going to get that shoe. Well, not only did I not get the Reebok Pump, I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly, I either ended up with a Payless high top or like a Walmart high top of some kind. So not only did I not get the shoe that was going to make me cool, if you remember being in middle school, the kids that didn't have the brand name stuff, they didn't have the cool stuff that everybody else had, they got made fun of for stuff like that. They got teased for having knockoff shoes or knockoff clothing. And so I went from thinking I was going to get this shoe that would make me popular to suddenly being terrified that I was going to get made fun of for having that shoe. Now, as an adult, I can fully understand why my parents did not want to buy me that shoe. Because if my kids came to me today and said, Dad, I need this $200 pair of high tops, I would look at them and say, no, son, what you need is a job. Because I'm not buying you a $200 pair of shoes. That's just not going to happen. But the truth is, even though I didn't get the shoe that I want, man, I wanted to be admired. I wanted people to look up to me for having this shoe and fitting in. And my guess is all of us can remember something from when we were kids that we thought, if I could just have this, then everybody would like me. I'd be one of the popular kids. I asked my wife about this, and she said, honey, what I really wanted was a purple Swatch watch. If you guys remember Swatch watches, they were terrible and ugly then, and I was going to get a picture of them, but even now, they still are terrible. But my guess is everybody wanted a certain pair of jeans, a certain pair of shoes, a certain backpack, whatever it is that you thought would make you fit in. And if you're joining us online right now, I'd love to see you guys just drop a comment on Facebook or on the Church Online platform. Tell us, what is it that you really, really wanted when you were a kid? Now, while I've reached the point in my life, I'm not worried about Reebok pumps anymore. They don't concern me. Nothing has changed when it comes to my desire to be accepted, to be liked, to have people build into my self-esteem. When we repeatedly don't feel like we're good enough, when we repeatedly don't feel like we have enough self-esteem, it does some crazy things to our head. It makes us have all sorts of weird thoughts, and we jump to all sorts of weird conclusions. And the truth is, low self-esteem is actually an epidemic in our society. This week, as I was getting ready for this sermon, I came across the same stat in almost every article I read. And they said that 95% of people suffer from some form of low self-esteem. My guess is the other 5% were so afraid of what people would think of them that they couldn't answer correctly. The truth is, we all suffer from some form of low self-esteem to one degree or another. And it's funny because we are a culture obsessed with self. I mean, I hear people talking about projecting their brand online. Not they're like selling something, it's their image, the thing that they're trying to put online for people to be able to admire. We're a culture obsessed with taking selfies. But when was the last time you saw somebody take a selfie the moment they wake up and their hair's sticking straight up, there's pillow creases on their face, and there's dry drool on the side of their mouth? Nobody wants to take that picture, or the picture at 2:30 in the afternoon when you have 3 toddlers running around your house and you're about to pull your hair out. Nobody puts that picture out there to be admired. They want the picture where their hair is all done, their makeup's all done, everything is perfect, and they put this image online for everybody else to see. The problem is every time we see that image, we start to think, man, I wish I could have that kind of life. Man, I wish I could live that way. The only problem is we're only seeing a little bit of that. We put this expectation on ourselves to be like everybody else, to live like everybody else, and then constantly feel like we're falling short. So the question is, how do we know if we're really struggling with low self-esteem or not? How do we know? So this week I went online and I did a simple search and just says, how do you know if you suffer from low self-esteem? And hundreds of quizzes came up online. Hundreds of quizzes came up online. So I thought, well, why don't we all just do one quiz together? Please don't raise your hand on these answers. You can keep these to yourself. But there are 9 questions this quiz said can help you determine if you have low self-esteem. And the first question is, do you have difficulty speaking up and prioritizing your own needs, wants, or feelings, especially when they conflict with somebody else's? When you have your own wants or your own need, and you think it's going to hurt somebody else, or you think for whatever reason that it's going to affect somebody else, you just set your own wants aside. Number 2, do you find yourself saying, I'm sorry, or feeling guilty for everyday actions? Let me give you an example. Yesterday I was in a store and I was getting something off the shelf, and I noticed there was somebody standing there waiting to get something off that same shelf. And I instantly turned around and said, oh, I'm sorry, and got out of the way. What am I apologizing for? It's just an everyday action. There's no need to apologize, but when you have low self-esteem, sometimes your first reaction is to say, I'm sorry, or feel guilty for simple actions that really have no effect on other people. Number 3, do you try to not rock the boat? Are you in a situation where you feel like everything's kind of a status quo and you see that there could be something done better, but you're afraid to say it because you're afraid it might upset something? Number 4, do you not feel deserving of or capable of having more? Do you feel like you're not worthy to get that promotion at work or to be with that certain group of people? You don't feel like you're good enough to do that. Number 5, and this is the one I think every married couple should answer yes to. Do you have difficulty making your own choices? And I say that because I know what's going to happen. You're going to leave here today and you're going to get in the car and you're going to say, honey, where do you want to get lunch at? And what's the answer going to be? I don't care, wherever you want to go. And then you'll spend 15 minutes trying to argue back and forth about where you should go get food because you can't make your own choice. But in all seriousness, when you have trouble making your own choices, or even when you make a choice, only to have somebody kind of push back on you and then you back down. Number 6, do you lack boundaries? Will you go to any extreme to get people to like you? Will you do things that you even know are not right or things you shouldn't do in order to win people as friends? Number 7, do you find yourself doing things or buying gifts excessively for other people? Especially those people that don't appreciate it. You buy people gifts in the hopes of winning their affection or the hopes of gaining their friendship just to try to feel accepted someplace. Number 8, do you have a negative self-perception? Are you terrified that somebody will find out who you really are and they won't accept you for who you are? And the 9th question on this quiz was, do you have a critical, abusive, internal dialogue? Do you have a little voice in your head that constantly says, I don't even know why you bother to try. You're not good enough for that. You're too overweight. You're too skinny. You're not strong enough. You're not tall enough. Whatever it is, that constant voice inside your head that wants to put you down. If you answered yes to any of these questions, my guess is at some level you suffer from low self-esteem or low self-worth. And again, like I said, this was just one of hundreds of quizzes that were available. And so after I read through that, I thought, man, how big of an issue is low self-esteem and low self-worth in our society? So I went to Amazon and I went to the book section and I typed in this question, or this title, self-help books. Does anybody want to guess the number of results on Amazon for self-help books? Just shout out a number. How many? I heard a couple different words. It's over 100,000 self-help books. 100,000 self-help books. There's a whole industry that has now sprouted up around this idea of people needing help or wanting self-help. And actually, this isn't really that new of a concept. Actually, I remember being a kid and late night, like on Channel 11 or whatever, they'd have the half-hour infomercials. And you'd have the guy saying, for 5 easy payments of $19.95, I can sell you my course on how you can become more confident in yourself. Or they do just attend my one-day seminar for $279, and I can make you get the job of your dreams. There is a whole industry that has sprouted up around this idea of needing to be built up, needing self-help, wanting our self-esteem built. And like I said, this was back in the 70s and 80s that I started to notice this, but it didn't take long for Saturday Night Live actually to catch on to this concept. And so Saturday Night Live created a character that every week had a little segment called Daily Affirmations. And he wanted to build people up, and it just became kind of an ongoing joke about how we could do this. And so I'm going to show you the opening clip to a character named Stuart Smalley. Now, if you don't remember Stuart Smalley, and maybe you're too young for that, first I want to apologize because this video is 30 years old, so the video quality isn't great. But I just want to show you the beginning segment that every week Saturday Night Live would show in order to kick off this clip. So let's watch this video.
I deserve good things. I am entitled to my share of happiness. I refuse to beat myself up. I am an attractive person. I am fun to be with.
Daily Affirmation with Stuart Smalley. Stuart Smalley is a caring nurturer, a member of several 12-step programs, but not a licensed therapist.
I'm going to do a terrific show today, and I'm going to help people because I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and doggone it, people like me.
I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and gosh darn it, people like me. It sounds like a great mantra to repeat over and over, right? I mean, the thing is, even though this video is meant to be funny, even though it was a joke to make fun of this self-help guru that were out there and this epidemic of low self-esteem, the truth is, low self-esteem causes some really, really big issues in our life. It creates all sorts of issues for us personally and in relationships and other areas. First, it gives us a damaged view of self. When we continuously feel bad about ourselves, or we have that internal voice that talks down to us, when we let Satan get in our head and start to whisper to us about how our worth is only tied to what other people think of us, it creates a real issue for our relationships with ourselves. When your self-esteem is low, oftentimes you're afraid of even trying to do anything new. Maybe you're in a situation where you need to take a step out of your comfort zone and do something, but you're so afraid of failure. You're so afraid of the results and the way people may look at you if things don't work out the way you want them to, that you don't even bother to try. Low self-esteem also causes all sorts of anxiety and stress issues in your life. This damaged view of self leads to what I like to call if I, then I statements. If I, then I statements. And they go like this. If I lose 20 pounds, then I'll feel more comfortable around other people. If I go to the gym and I work out, I'll have confidence in my everyday life. If I get that promotion at work, then I will finally feel like I've made it. If I get this new house, then I will finally feel like I fit in. You see where you go with this? It's always conditional upon something else. Now, there's nothing wrong with wanting to be in good shape, nothing wrong with wanting to work out or any of those other things. The problem comes when you tie your worth to those things. When you tie your worth to those conditional if-I statements, that's when the problem comes in place. Now, I read a stat this week that said that only 2% of women find themselves to be beautiful or believe themselves to be beautiful. Means 98 out of every 100 women do not find themselves to be beautiful. Guys, our number's a little higher. It said like 30% of guys believe that they're attractive. But even at that, that's still 70% of guys that don't believe that they're attractive. We have a real problem with the way that we view ourselves. And it's not just damage to ourselves that's caused by low self-esteem. It's damage to our relationships with other people as well. When you have low self-esteem, you want to retreat away from other people. When you have an opportunity to do something, a lot of times you don't feel like you're good enough to do these things. You don't feel good enough to go out and hang out with these people. And so you find reasons to stay away, to retreat to yourself, to keep yourself isolated and away from other people. Or you take the other extreme. People don't feel good about themselves. Their self-esteem's low. And so they go full bore over the top to this kind of extreme party person where everybody looks up to them, everybody laughs at them, everybody, jokes with them, or they get to the point where they're drinking all the time, or they're sleeping around, whatever it takes to fit in. We cross all sorts of boundaries in order to win friends and be around people that we want to be around. But Jesus made the statement one time that you're supposed to love your neighbor as yourself. How do you love your neighbor as yourself when you don't know how to love yourself? When you're so down on yourself that you can't even take care of yourself, it damages your relationship with other people. But not only does it damage your relationship with yourself and with other people, it damages your view of God. Because honestly, what happens is, remember God, in the beginning of Genesis, it says that God created us in his image and likeness. And when we're constantly putting ourselves down, saying, God, you made me too short. God, you made me too tall. God, you made me too heavy. God, you didn't make me smart enough. God, you didn't make me whatever. Basically, what you're saying is, God, you messed up. God, you're not good enough. Because if we're made in his image and likeness, And we're constantly beating ourselves up. We're telling God that he isn't good enough as well. Getting us to doubt ourselves, getting ourselves to look down on ourselves, this is not a new trick for Satan. This is a trick he's been using since the garden, trying to get people to doubt themselves and not have confidence in themselves. And in fact, Satan tried to do the exact same thing to Jesus at the very beginning of his ministry here on earth. In Matthew chapter 4, starting in verse 1, Jesus is in the desert and the devil begins to tempt him. And I just want to read through this and we're going to kind of break this down. Matthew chapter 4, verse 1. Then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. And after fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. The tempter came to him and said, "If you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread." Here's another one of those if I, then I statements. If you do this, then I will give you this. And Jesus answered, "It is written, man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God." Then the devil took him to the holy city and had him stand on the highest point of the temple. "If you are the Son of God, then throw yourself down, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you. And they will lift you up in their hands so that you will not strike your foot against the stone." And Jesus answered him, "It is also written, do not put the Lord your God to the test." Again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. "All this I will give you if you bow down and worship me." And Jesus said, "Away from me, Satan. For it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only." Then the devil left him, and the angel came and attended him. So the three things that the devil used to tempt Jesus are the same three things the devil likes to whisper in our ear to make us doubt ourselves. The first one is he makes you question what you're capable of. The devil makes you question what you're capable of. Remember, in the beginning of this the story with Jesus, he says, "Jesus, if you're the Son of God, then turning stones into bread should be no problem for you, right?" And see, the thing is, you and I fall into this same kind of trap. Satan likes to whisper in our ear and tell us, your worth is tied to the things that you do. We spend a lot of time trying to prove to other people that we're good enough. We spend a lot of time trying to prove our worth. We get trapped in this performance trap where it feels like we have to do more and do more and do more and do more in order to make people look at us and feel like we have any worth at all. And eventually the problem becomes you do so much, you try so hard, you just have nothing left to give. And then you start to feel like you're not good enough or you're not worthy enough. Or many people tie their worth to their career. They tie their worth to their job and what they do. But what happens when that gets taken away from you? What happens when you lose that job or maybe you retire? Where's your worth then? If you're not doing this and you're not performing anymore, how do you feel like you have any worth? And sometimes, even in your job, sometimes what you hear is maybe you have a boss that's overly negative with you and all they ever do is criticize you, and it starts to mess with your head and it starts to make you doubt yourself to the point that sometimes you get so wrapped up in the negative thoughts that your boss has put in your head that anytime your boss comes up to you and says something like, "Hey, can you step in my office for just a moment?" Your first reaction is, "Oh no, what have I done? What didn't I do? What did I forget to do? I knew I wasn't good enough for this job," and you start to have all these doubts. This happened to me a couple years ago. A boss said, "Hey, can you step in my office for a moment?" And as I'm sitting down, he's like, "Why do you look so nervous?" And I said, "Because every time I get called into a boss's office someplace, I'm getting yelled at for something." And he said, "I just wanted to tell you did a good job." And I'm like, it took me a second to think, what did you just say? Because I was so used to getting beat up that way that I just didn't know how to react. Parents, can I give you a word of caution? I know I'm really bad at this, and my guess is maybe some of you are as well. When it comes to your kids, we all want our kids to get good grades. And we push them hard to get good grades and perform and get the better grades than we did so they can get into the college that they want to go to someday. But here's the problem. Sometimes we push our kids really hard and we expect them to get straight A's. Can I just give you some news? Sometimes a C may be the best a student can actually do on a certain assignment. And the problem comes is that when we push our kids really, really hard, it's easy for them to start to believe that their worth and your love for them is tied to their grades. And I say this because it is such a narrow line to walk between pushing them hard, which you should do. We want our kids to do better than us. We want them to get the good grades. And quite honestly, sometimes they need a push to do that. But always make sure that they understand that your love for them and their worth is not tied to that letter grade. Again, it's just a word of caution because I know I've been there and I've crossed that line probably more times than I count. And I'm sure my kids are over on this side of the room right now going, absolutely. Listen, not only does Satan make us doubt what we're capable of, he asks the question, do you really have any influence? Do you really have any influence? You remember the second part of the temptation with Jesus is the devil takes him to the high point of the temple and says, if I throw you down, and if you're the Son of God, then surely the angels will come and they'll rescue you. And for you and I think a lot of times we think that our worth is tied to the amount of friends we have or the influence we have with the people around us. Come on, I know I'm guilty of this as well. I'll post something on a social media thing, and I'll come back an hour or a couple hours later, and I'm like, 5 likes? How did they only get 5 likes on that? Somebody else posted almost the same thing like 6 hours ago, and they have 100 likes on that. And so you start to think, well, I'm just not as good as that person. I'm not as accepted as that person. And it becomes very easy to start to go down that path. The other way this happens a lot, and I've noticed this, and again, because I think I've probably done this before, is when people like to drop names in a conversation. Where you have a conversation with somebody, and it's not just, well, yeah, I was talking to so-and-so, and, they told me about this. Okay, but it's a drop of a name like, well, one day I was hanging out with this famous athlete, and this person, we were out hanging out, partying together, and we drop these names to other people so that people will look at us and think, look at the circles they run in. Look at the group of friends that they have. And it becomes very easy for us to think, well, they're better than me because they've got this group of friends. I'm not worth what they're worth. And so Satan wants us to doubt whether or not we have any real influence with people. The next thing that Satan does in this temptation with Jesus is he asks Jesus the question, basically, what stuff do you have? Remember at the end, he looks at all the kingdoms of the earth and he says, Jesus, if you bow down to me, these are all yours. Now, I'm not going to go into great detail because this is essentially what we talked about 2 weeks ago, trading now for later. But Satan makes us think because other people have a nicer house than us, because they have a nicer car than us, maybe they have a lake house and a boat and all these other things, that somehow we are less than because our house is maybe a $100,000 house and their house is a $500,000 house. And it makes us start to doubt who we are and feel worse about ourselves. But the problem is that when we start to focus on these whispers and these lies from Satan about how we're less than or not enough, we miss out on who God says that we are. We miss out on who God calls us to be. And in fact, Jesus actually tells an incredible parable about a vineyard owner. Some of you might be familiar with this story, but essentially there's a vineyard owner and it's harvest time. And he goes out early in the morning and he hires some workers to come in and collect the harvest. Well, he quickly realizes he needs more workers. So a couple hours later, the vineyard owner goes out and he brings in more workers. And then a couple hours later, he gets more workers and more workers and more workers until about 5 o'clock in the evening, he goes out and he hires still more workers. And there's only about an hour left in the day at this point. And so an hour left in the day, it's quitting time, and we're going to pick up the story in Matthew chapter 20, verse 8. It says, when evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, call the workers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last ones hired and going to the first. The workers who were hired about 5 p.m. came and each received a denarius. So when those came who were hired first, they were expected to receive more. But each one of them also received a denarius. And when they received it, they began to grumble against the landowner. Those who were hired last, they only worked 1 hour, they said, and you have made them equal to us who have borne the burden of the work and the heat of the day. But the vineyard owner answered them and said, I am not being unfair to you. Didn't you agree to work for a denarius? Take your pay and go. I want to give the one who was hired last the same as I gave you. Don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money? Or are you envious because I am so generous? And so the last will be first and the first will be last. And the reason I love this story because not only does it tell us how God looks at us, I think it's a good example of how we look at one another. Now, in this story, if you remember at the very beginning, you have people that have been there hours, working 12 or 13 hours in the sun. And in the end, somebody works 1 hour and they get the same wage. So if I came to you and said, hey, start working at 6 o'clock in the morning for me, you work 13 hours, and I came to you and said, hey, only work an hour, and you can get the same pay, you would be furious. I've been out in the sun baking all day. I'm dying, and you want to pay them the exact same amount of money as me? That's not fair. My guess, all of us would be upset by that scenario. But the vineyard owner, who in case you haven't figured out, is God in this story, basically says, listen, I can do with my vineyard whatever I want. This vineyard, all mine. I own it all. I can pay whatever I want to pay. I can give whatever I want to give. I don't need your opinion of what worth is. I've got my own view of what worth is. And I think you and I, we want to judge other people based on what they do, how much they serve, how much they attend, how much they give, all of these other things. And we look at them and say, man, they're worth so much more than me. Or the other side of this saying, this person never serves, they never do anything, they're not as valuable as I am. And God says, no, you're missing the point. You're all equally valuable to me. And this is great news because if you've been following Jesus for 8 minutes or you've been following Jesus for 80 years, God says, you are worth the same to me. There is no difference in worth. So the question becomes, what is your worth to God? Several years ago, I heard Rick Warren actually preach on a very similar topic, and he used this great story. He asked the question, he said, if I asked you today, what is your house worth? Now, unless you're in real estate, you may think you have a pretty good idea of maybe what your house is worth. You may think, my house is worth $250,000. But here's the thing, your house may actually be worth $310,000. Maybe it's worth $190,000. Same thing goes for cars. You may think your used car that you're driving is worth $20,000 yet, but maybe it's worth $25,000. Maybe it's worth $10,000. Because here's the amazing thing about worth. Worth is only determined by what somebody is willing to pay for it. You can list your house for $280,000, and if you get 10 offers and the best offer is $250,000, guess what your house is worth? $250,000. It's not worth what you thought it was worth. It may not be worth what you determined, and it's the same for your car. You go to trade it in, and the dealer says it's only worth this. Well, I thought it was worth twice that. Well, it's only worth what they're willing to pay. So the question again is, what is your worth? Your worth is only determined by what someone is willing to pay for it. And here's the fantastic news. God paid for you with the most precious thing he owned. God paid for you, he purchased you back, he redeemed you, he saved you with the most valuable thing he had, and he gave Jesus for you and said, this is your worth. This is what you're worth to me. You are worth my son dying on a cross. Maybe it's time we get to the point that we stop listening to the whispers of Satan in our ear saying, you're not worth anything. You're not good enough. And we start remembering that we are worth everything. Remember, John 3:16 says, for God so loved the world, he gave his only son. Maybe it's time we start realizing that our worth is determined by God and not by the whispers in our ear, not by the voice in our head telling us we're not good enough. It's only determined by the one who sent his son for you. So I want to challenge you this week. I want to give you this challenge as you go into your week. I want you to do a simple web search for me this week. Pull out your phones, go home and put it on a browser, and just type this search in. Who does God say I am? Who does God say I am? And now, when you type that in, you're going to have tons and tons of articles that come up. And I'm going to invite you to read through a couple of those and just pick out 2, maybe 3 different phrases that God says about you. And write down that passage. And then, this week, when Satan starts to whisper in your ear, and he starts to tell you, you're not good enough, you're not smart enough, then you can start to say the same thing Jesus said. Get away from me, Satan. Because here's who God says I am. Here's a couple of verses that I'm going to give you guys in advance. When you start to feel bad or you start to feel like you're not good enough, you can say, Satan, I'm not listening to you because God says I am loved. When Satan starts to whisper in your ear, telling you that you can never be forgiven, you can say, no, Satan, God says I am forgiven. When you feel like you don't fit in anyplace else, you can say, Satan, get away from me. The Bible tells me that I am a child of God. When you feel left out, you feel like you're not good enough, or you're not part of that inner circle someplace, and you start to have those doubts creeping in your head, you can say, Satan, I'm not listening to you anymore. Because God says, I am chosen. And again, these are just one of many, or several of many things that the Bible tells us about who God says we are. Read through that list. Look up what you find on your own. Because you are not what other people say about you. You are who God says you are. He says you are worthy of the sacrifice of his son and that you are loved. Stop letting Satan deceive you and keep you from the life God has called you to. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, God, we thank you for the gift of your son. God, if we're honest with ourselves today, we've all suffered with doubt, low self-esteem issues, all sorts of things, and we've listened to those voices, and they've kept us from so many of the things that you've called us to. God, help us all today to hold on to the truths about who you say we are. Help us to always remember that our worth is determined by the one who willingly gave himself on the cross. God, we thank you for the amazing gift, for the sacrifice you paid for all of us. It's in your son's name that we pray. Amen. Thank you all. Have a good week. We'll see you next week.